Hey, good morning, Espeja. Can you all hear me good? Good. In the United States, in the suburbs of Chicago, there is a Christian college named Wheaton. And in the late 1940s, there was a young man studying there, a young man named Jim Elliot. Jim was popular at school. He was a champion wrestler. He was good at academics. And he was quite handsome. So a lot of the ladies liked him. But Jim didn't seem to like them. There was a young lady there, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth talked about how he just wasn't asking girls on dates. And they were wondering, does he hate women? Well, it turned out Jim didn't hate women. As a teenager in high school, he discovered girls. And he found out they were very interesting, very pretty, and also very expensive. So when he got to college, he decided to just eliminate them from his schedule. He wanted to focus on God, and he didn't want to focus on girls. So while he was at Wheaton, he just did not ask girls out on dates. Well, at Wheaton, there was also a particular tradition there. They had a tradition where the school yearbook came out, and a lot of these young ladies who had their eye on a particular guy would ask that guy to sign their yearbook for them. And they were always hoping that he would not just write his name, but say something sweet, something nice, something that would show that maybe he was interested in that particular girl. So Elizabeth had her eye on Jim. She asked Jim to sign her yearbook, and he did. And not only did he sign it, he wrote a verse. Well, this was exciting. She's hoping, well, maybe it talks about romance, maybe it talks about love, who knows? She gets back to her dorm room as fast as she can. She tears open her Bible to see what this verse says. It was 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4. Here's what it says. A soldier on active service will not let himself be involved in civilian affairs. He must be wholly at his commanding officer's disposal. That wasn't quite the verse she was hoping for. Despite this verse, though, Elizabeth and Jim Elliot eventually got married. Not in the United States, though. In South America, in Ecuador. Jim and some friends decided to go to Ecuador to share the gospel with a jungle tribe. A jungle tribe that had been known for its ferocity, for being dangerous. Despite this, Jim said these people need to hear about Jesus. So him and his friends got into a plane and they would drop presents off for these people. And they even made some initial contact away from their territory, downriver. And then finally, one day, they finally went to their territory and made contact with the people. Unbeknownst to them, though, one of those people they'd initially made contact with lied to the leaders of this tribe about their intentions. So when Jim and his friends arrived, 10 warriors from this tribe saw him and his friends and killed them. They were martyred for the gospel of Jesus Christ. A lot of people will hear this and they'll think, what a waste. These young men, they were in the prime of their lives. What did they die for? Some old superstitious religion and some jungle tribe that neither knowed about nor cared about their God. Couldn't they have lived or even died for something better? But that was not the attitude of Jim Elliot. Before he died, he wrote this in his diary. He said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." Jim Elliot's not the only one who suffered and died for the gospel. Yi Soon-ok lives in the United States. She's testified before the U.S. Congress, but she was not born in the United States. She was born and raised in North Korea, North Hamgyong province. And when she lived there, she was a senior member of the local Communist Party. As a result, she got nice things. She had a home with appliances and food, things that many other people in her area did not have. All of that disappeared, though, one day when some corrupt officials falsely accused her of doing something wrong. And as a result, she was sent to prison. When she was there, she discovered just how different that world was from the life that she was living. Her first rude awakening to this whole world occurred when she was forced to kneel down in front of the prison guards, and the information, the statistics about her were read out. When they got to the charges that she had been convicted for, she said, "I'm innocent. I beg you for the chance to appeal to a higher court. I didn't do this thing." When she made this appeal, one of the prison guards came over, kicked her in the chest so hard that she fell over. And that guard said to her, "If you are going to survive in this place, you are going to have to forget that you are a human being. You are nothing more than an animal." That turned out to be right. Almost. Because in this prison, they were treated even worse than animals. They got no more than about 5 hours of sleep every night, but oftentimes maybe just 2 hours, and they would be exhausted from a day of working. The food they got amounted to no more than about a handful. And they would be so hungry that they would do anything for more food. One time they were working outside, carrying soil, and walking on this clay path, and discovered the clay tasted delicious. So they started eating this clay. Lee Soon-ok only ate a little bit. But that night, the women who ate that clay had horrible stomach pains. So bad that 20 women died that night. There was no medical care. They were not taken to the hospital. In fact, the guards came by and just made fun of them for eating the clay, now suffering. They would have to work every day in factories to produce products, clothing, and they had quotas they had to reach. If they did not reach these quotas, the meager food they had would be reduced even more. They were so desperate for food that when they were working on a sewing machine, if the needle that was sewing into the clothes hit them, it would go through their skin, through their body. And there was no time to stop, to scream, to go to the hospital. Instead, all they would do was put a little machine oil on it and just keep working. They could not afford to stop. And while they were working, the prison guards would come by and beat them, kick them, spit on them, hit them, call them all kinds of vile words. They couldn't stop working. They couldn't even protect themselves. They had to just keep making these clothes. They would get beaten for no good reason at all. But when they actually did something, like make a little mistake in the clothing, that's when they would actually get punished. And their punishment was to be put in solitary confinement for days. Now, normally you might think, well, that's kind of great. They can go to solitary confinement, they can rest, they can relax, have some time off. No, not this solitary confinement. The room they were in was so small they could not stand up. There would be a hole in the ground. In the summer, maggots would come in the ground. And in the winter, the cold air would come up and freeze their bones. They couldn't rest and relax by lying against the walls because there were concrete thorns that came out from the sides that prevented them from resting or sleeping. After days of being in this solitary confinement, maybe weeks, they would come out and many of them literally could not walk. Some of them were paralyzed for life. This was the environment she was in. What made it even worse is that many other prisoners were like her. They had been falsely accused and unjustly imprisoned. I hope we're all okay. Unjustly accused and falsely imprisoned. Some of them were there for just trivial offenses. Some of them were starving and stole a little food. Some of them had children that were dying of hunger. They stole some food to feed their children, and then they would get 3 years, 10-year prison sentences because of this. And when Lee Soon-ok was in prison, she found there was one group of people who were treated worse than all the others. Superstitious people who were in prison for their superstitious beliefs. They would be given the worst jobs and they would be punished and beaten more than anybody else. This group were the Christians. And despite the suffering that they endured, they would often sacrifice themselves for their friends. They would take the punishment for other people and they would work harder in quietness and humility and patience. Sometimes they would even give their lives for each other. Once a month, all the Christians would be assembled before the entire prison, all 6,000 prisons, and they would be ordered to renounce their faith, to say that they did not believe in Jesus, they did not believe in heaven. If a guard could get them to renounce their faith, he would be rewarded and promoted. And so they would try everything possible to get them to renounce their faith. She didn't understand why they did what they did. They could get free or at least a better job in prison if they could just renounce what they believed. She didn't understand this. She figured they were just stupid people. She hated them. One time she describes how a group of women, many of them Christian, were charged with one of the worst possible jobs. They had to get human excrement, crap, from the toilets, put into a container and carried over to a large tank where this excrement was stored. This happened in the summer of 1991 during the monsoon season. As a result, it was raining so hard, so heavy, that they could not get the tank lid open. So one of the women climbed on top to open the lid, but it was so slippery she fell inside. The other prisoners wanted to help her. They wanted to get a rope to help her to come out. But the guards said, "Don't help her, just leave her in there." But the other prisoners didn't listen. They climbed up on top. They couldn't help her to get out, so they jumped inside to try to help her out. Eventually, 4 women went inside, each of them trying to push the other one up and out. They couldn't do it. Then the guard gave the order. He said, "Close the top of that tank and leave them in there to die." Those women turned out all to be Christians. They died because of their love for their sisters in Christ. When Lee Soon-ok heard about this love and this suffering, she describes her reaction this way: "I couldn't understand their actions because I didn't know their God. Although they were not permitted to talk to each other, they would die for each other. If another prisoner did something wrong, a Christian would take the responsibility and then was beaten until she died. When I saw their love, it raised questions in my mind that I could not erase. How could they die for someone else? What was there about heaven that was worth the cost of death?" Incredible suffering. In February 1992, she says she went to a smelting factory. It was coming to the end of the day. While she was there, she saw 8 men carrying around molten iron. These were Christian men. And one of the guards looked at these 8 men and he said, "Tomorrow is a re-education day. And as you know, it is held because of your stubbornness. Tomorrow you will tell all the prisoners that there is no heaven, there is no God, and you do not believe. You will do this or you will die. Do you understand?" All those 8 men just stood there, hung their head, and said nothing. Well, this just made him enraged. And he demanded, "You will renounce God. Do you understand?" He was screaming at them. They still said nothing. So he ordered all of them to come before him, kneel down and put their face to the ground. Then he ordered some of the other prisoners there, to go and get molten iron and pour it over these men. When the other prisoners heard that, their faces filled with fear and they hesitated. This molten metal was more than 1,500 degrees Celsius. But when they hesitated, he looked at them and scowled and says, "Do you want to die with them?" So they hurried over, got a big kettle of this stuff, and poured it over the men of God. Lee Soon-ok says that when the smell of their burning flesh hit her, and when she saw their shriveled bodies lying up, it was so horrible that she fell to the ground and was screaming as if she was crazy. And then she reacts, says this, "I looked at their shrunken bodies and wondered in my heart, what do they believe? What do they see in the empty sky? What could be more important to them than their lives? In the years I was in prison, I saw many believers die, yet they never denied the God who is in heaven. All they had to do was say they don't believe in religion, and they would have been released. I didn't understand what made them not fear death. Their unbelievable faith brought a big question into my heart. What did they see? And what am I missing?" The suffering of believers in North Korea continues on to this day. And it's not simply in North Korea. It's so many other parts of the world, in China, throughout the Middle East, in India, and many parts of the world. Believers in Jesus suffer and die for their faith in him. So many of the churches that I've been part of, this whole thought is completely alien to the Christianity they know. And so many of the churches I go to, they talk and think so differently. The things I hear Christians say amount to, well, I would wake up early Sunday morning, get to church by 9:30, but it's so early and I'm tired on Sundays. The sermon, it's kind of boring. The songs, I don't really like them. And there's someone at church I don't like. I don't go to church. I don't really care. God understands. Or I hear Christians say, I would fast. I would go without food for many days, but you don't understand. When I fast, I get hungry. When I get hungry, I'm cranky. When I'm cranky, I'm angry. God doesn't want me to be angry. Oh, I would give money sacrificially to help plant orphanages and churches in other parts of the world, but you don't understand. I can't afford that. I've got to buy an ultra high definition TV. I need it. Oh, I would share the gospel with people, but they might get upset. I don't want anybody getting upset at me. I would share the truth online, but someone might unfriend me. I don't want to get unfriended. For so many Christians in the world today, the whole idea of suffering and dying for Jesus is utterly foreign. And if that's the way you think, if this doesn't make sense to you, it's because you have been fed a distorted, false gospel. The true gospel of Jesus Christ involves suffering and even dying for his name. So often people think of following Jesus just a private, subjective truth. It's something that you believe, something you think, like your favorite flavor of ice cream, or your favorite color, or your favorite restaurant. You have a favorite restaurant for you. You don't have a favorite restaurant for the restaurant. You don't suffer and die for your favorite restaurant. Your favorite restaurant is your favorite because it serves your needs. And if it doesn't, you find another favorite restaurant. And so often people think of following Jesus, and just even religion like that. Religion is there for you. God is here for you. You don't suffer and die for God. He does stuff for you and makes your life good. That's not what the Bible talks about. Over and over again, in the Word of God, it talks about the need to suffer and even die for the name of Jesus. Let me give you just a few of these verses. Luke chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. Jesus says, I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But whoever disowns me before others will be disowned before the angels of God. Matthew chapter 10, verses 37 and 38. Jesus again is speaking and says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. 2 Timothy 3:12. In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Philippians 1:29. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Matthew 10:22. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. Matthew 10:38 to 39. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. Jesus doesn't call us to just suffer for suffering's sake, but he calls us to be willing to suffer for his name's sake. Sometimes you can avoid suffering and still follow Jesus. I think of a friend I have in Canada, a colleague. He told me about another friend he had, a Christian, who was smuggling Bibles into China. And he was at the border, and the Chinese customs official was asking him something like, do you have any religious literature? Because it wasn't allowed to be brought into China. Well, this man didn't want to say yes, because then those Bibles would be confiscated. His whole purpose for coming would be thwarted. But he didn't want to say no, because he was convicted you should never lie. So what to do? He didn't say yes or no. Instead, he responded and said, you betcha. Well, this customs official doesn't know English very well. Doesn't know. What does you betcha mean? Right? It basically means yes, but the guy didn't understand. So he asked him again, like, sir, do you have any religious literature? You betcha. And he asked him again, you betcha. And he just kept saying, you betcha, you betcha. Finally, the customs officer just gave up and said, okay, you can go. So that was an example where someone was able to keep their convictions and didn't end up with any kind of persecution. But many times that cannot happen. Sundar Singh was born and raised in the northwest part of India in the late 1800s, a long time ago. He lived in a little town or village called Rampur. It was far from the big city. His father was Sikh. So he was Sikh, but his mother was Hindu. So he also learned a lot about Hinduism. He learned the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita. He would wake up early and pray to the Hindu gods next to his mother. His mother would take him out into the forest to meet a sadhu, a Hindu holy man, and he would repeat the Gita to this man. At a very young age, just 10, 12 years old, Sundar was a very religious young boy. So much so, in fact, that his father was kind of worried. And his father would tell him, you know, there's time enough to pray. Why don't you just go outside and play with your friends? So he would go and he would play, but there would be a Sikh temple next door, next to him, a Gurdwara. And he would wander inside and listen to a priest recite the Sikh scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib. Sundar, even though his father was Sikh and his mother was Hindu, he went to a Christian school, the American Presbyterian School. The only reason was because the government school was 3 miles away, and he would have to walk through basically the Indian desert to get there. The heat was too much for a little boy to do. There was no way. So his parents sent him to this Christian school. Sometimes somebody would ask his father, are you sure this is a good idea? I mean, maybe he might get brainwashed by the Christian teachers there and end up a Christian. His father said, "Do not fear. My son is Sikh. He knows who he is. He was born Sikh, he will die Sikh. There is nothing to fear." Sundar had a pretty good life. He was a studious, good boy at school. But everything changed. His world came crashing down when his mother died. And he transformed from a studious, good student to a rebellious, even violent young kid. At school, he would misbehave, make fun of his teachers, make fun of Jesus. His teachers told him that Jesus can give him the peace he is looking for. But he wanted nothing to do with their Jesus. He came to hate everything the Christians were about. And he was so bad and so frustrated, so upset that he managed to convince his father to let him trek the 3 miles every day to the government school. And that's what he started to do. And while he was going to his government school, he became something of a little gang leader. And he started attacking the Christians. His father couldn't believe the stories he was hearing about his young religious son. He trekked that long journey through the heat. But as the summer came, the heat became intense. He contracted malaria. He could no longer make that trip. His father convinced him to go back to the Christian school. His teachers, as you might expect, they weren't particularly excited to have him back, but they accepted him back in his classes. But now he wasn't this angry, rebellious young man anymore. Instead, he was just depressed and didn't care about anything. Lethargic, he would sit in his class, barely listening to anything that was going on. Except in one class, Bible class. That's when he woke up. What he loved to do was ask the teacher some question that made her or him look stupid and the Bible look silly. And everybody in class would laugh. That was fun. But sometimes even that wasn't good enough, and he would just get up and walk out of class. One day he went to the headmaster and asked to buy a New Testament. When that happened, the headmaster was excited. Maybe young Sundar is deciding to become a Christian, or maybe at least he's interested. But if the headmaster knew why he bought it, he would not have been excited. Sundar went to his friends and he said, "Come with me to my home. I will show you what I think of the Christians." And then he went to the courtyard of his house, got some wood, got some kerosene, and poured it over the wood, started a fire. Then he took that Christian book, opened it up, and started tearing page out of page from this New Testament and throwing it into the fire. His father walked into the house, saw what his son was doing. He said, "What are you doing, boy? We are not Christians. We are Sikh. But it's a good book. Your mother said so. What are you doing? Don't burn their book." His father was talking. His friends started slinking out of the courtyard. Sundar said nothing. He took that book, put it into the hottest part of the fire, ignored his father, just walked into the house. Over the next 3 days, he thought carefully about what he was going to do next. Sundar decided that life was simply not worth living. And he decided that there was a train that went by his town every morning at 5 a.m. After 3 days of careful contemplation, he was going to lay on that track and allow the train to run him over. He was a teenager, around 15 years old. But he knew this was the end for him. He decided he would do one thing before he took his life. The last night, he was going to pray and ask God to show himself to him. He was going to pray and say, "God, if you're out there, reveal yourself to me." So that last night he began 7 hours before the train was going to come, and he went and had a shower, had cold water pouring over him for an entire hour. Then he went to his room and started praying. "God, if you are there, show yourself to me." The hours went by, 1 hour after an hour. Nothing happened. At 4:45, though, he burst out of his room, ran into his father's room, and grabbed his father's shoulder and said, "I have seen Jesus." His father said, "What are you talking about, boy? It's 5 a.m. I have seen Jesus. He told his father about how he was going to kill himself and how he was praying. And when he was doing his last prayer, suddenly Jesus appeared in the room and said, why are you persecuting me? You've been praying to know the right way. I am the way. Follow me. Sundar's father heard this and said, boy, you're either dreaming or you're crazy. Go back to bed. In fact, you must be crazy because a few days ago you were trying to burn the Christian book and now you're saying Jesus appeared to you? Sundar looked at his hands and he said, these hands did that act and I can never remove the stain from them. But until the day I die, I am his. Over the coming weeks and months, his family did everything they could to dissuade him from his decision. His uncle once took him to the cellar of his house and said, I'll give you all this treasure if you just give up this Jesus nonsense. And after weeks and months of trying to persuade him to be a Sikh, his father led him out of the house and said to him, you are no longer my son. You can no longer live in this house. I never knew you. His father disowned him. He left that house, got on a train, and while he was on this train, he started to vomit up blood. And that's when he realized that before his father disowned him, they had his last meal poisoned. It was better to have a dead son than a Christian son. Sundar survived that poisoning, but it was only the beginning of the suffering that he endured throughout his life. When people hear about the suffering of Sundar Singh, when they hear about the death of Jim Elliot, when they hear about those who died in North Korea, who died throughout the world today, they think, what is the point? Why are these people dying and suffering in this way? The Apostle Paul, he gives the answer in the letters that he wrote in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul suffered greatly in his life as well. And he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And in Romans 8, verse 18, he says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. You see, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. Thank you.